Welcome to the Literature Lounge, where writers and authors share their stories behind their stories. Can you tell our listeners what inspired you to write Rasas in Divine Relationships, and how did you decide to focus on divine couples to explore this entire concept of Rasas?
As the name suggests, in Hindi or in Sanskrit, it means juice and or the essence. And these you can see because along with taste come emotions. And these are 9 different emotions that Bharat Muni has mentioned in his Natya Shastra. And I felt that these emotions are valid, amongst humans, but also amongst the divine. Because it's the same challenges that they go through. The beauty only lies in the way they handle it. When I was reading Bhagavatam Puran, I realized that Bhagwan was not just being funny with them or not just like cracking jokes or pulling pranks. He was doing it, but underlying, he was trying to teach them life lessons. For example, this popular story of Krishna taking away their clothes when they were having a bath in the river. So, as per our scriptures, it's considered a kind of a path to have bath in the rivers naked. You had to, it's like a disrespect to the river. And that's what they were doing. And Bhagwan wanted to teach them the lesson that this is not right. I think the biggest lesson that I would draw is from Ashwatthama because, he was born with a blessing of Shivji. And I think the path he chose was wrong, which landed him with a curse from Krishna Bhagwan because he tried to kill an infant in the womb.
Hi, in today's episode, we have with us Shalini Modi, who's an astrologer and an avid follower of old Indian scriptures, the Puranas, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Yoga Sutras, which she feels have a lot to offer. It is her belief that the stories and the philosophy in them are relevant to our lives even today, and parallels can be drawn to any situation in our lives, and I too agree with her on that. Today, she joins us to discuss her latest book, Rasas in Divine Relationships, one of the better Indian mythology books in recent times that offers a unique take on the lives and stories of deific couples from Puranas and the epics. So, Rasas in Divine Relationships is the book that we're going to today talk about. So, to begin with, the first thought, Shalini, that comes to me is that can you tell our listeners what inspired you to write Rasas in Divine Relationships, and how did you decide to focus on divine couples to explore this entire concept of Rasas? Because the word Rasa also, I think it would be wonderful for you to break it down for the listeners.
Sure, Moa. So basically, Rasa, as the name suggests, in Hindi or in Sanskrit, it means juice and or the essence. So, and these you can see because along with taste come emotions. And these are 9 different emotions that Bharat Muni has mentioned in his Natya Shastra. And I felt that these emotions are valid, amongst humans, but also amongst the divine, because it's the same challenges that they go through. The beauty only lies in the way they handle it compared to, the way we handle it. So one was that I realized that the life was not devoid of these emotions. And the other thing, while reading the scriptures, I realized that they were a sum total of various relationships, because through these relationships, they teach you lessons, how to handle your life, how symbolism helps you bring a parallel to today's day and age. So that's why I thought, why not combine the two and interweave these emotions into the life of these divine couples. Also, I felt that each relationship was unique. And the uniqueness came from that one dominant emotion or rasa that, characterized their particular relationship. So that encouraged me to bring
So, can
forth
you just share an example, of a story from your book where a divine couple's experience is going to be very universal for the human struggle? Because in today's world, everybody's struggling with their relationships, and I think there are too many breakups than what we heard in the past. And so it's quite a breaking of the system that was there in India where people lived forever and ever. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I so agree with you that maintaining relationships has become a big challenge. And I feel that, though I'll give you my favorite story from the book, but I feel that each chapter, each rasa, teaches us how to handle our life in that particular emotion. faced with that particular emotion. But my favorite is about Kunti and Pandu, a couple which is very less spoken about, because usually our focus is on Draupadi and her 5 husbands. But Kunti had become a mother even before she was married. And
Yes.
she had let go of Karn because she was scared of infamy for her family. And when she got married, her very marriage ka base was fear, because she was always living in this fear that what if my secret is known to all. And from there it started the journey. Then her husband bought another wife who was prettier, more bubbly, and she always was scared of the favoritism of her husband towards her. Then her husband got cursed, and then the curse brought fear of his death. And it also brought the fear of remaining childless, because he was cursed that he could never copulate with his wives, and so they could never have children. So all of these kind of different fears always underlined her relationship with Pandu. But even with his death, the fear didn't end, because then it became the fear of bringing up the children by herself. So, but the beauty lies in the way she handled it. So with her inner strength, with whatever blessings she had from the Vasha Rishi, and with penance, she managed to tide over all of this. So that I feel, yeah.
So what are the 9 rasas? Even me, I don't know actually what are the 9 rasas. It would be wonderful if you can tell us what are the 9 rasas.
Sure, Mahua. So basically, one is Shantras, which is my favorite. So it is connected to Shiva and Parvati in my book, because we are all aspiring for this quiet mind in this chaotic world. So that is Shantras, where I think the inner silence is more important than the outer silence. And then Raudraras, which is anger, which is very common. All of us face bouts of anger. So Ahilya Rishi Patni and Gautam Rishi, how anger played out in their lives and how they handled it. Veeras, which is strength. So it is strength of character, and it is the courage to do. So Veer, usually you connect it with a soldier, but it doesn't necessarily mean fighting on a battlefield. It means even giving, life challenges a good fight. So that's what I saw in Lakshman and his wife Urmila. And Krishna and Rukmani are the Shringaras, which is love and aesthetic. And I don't know how many I've done so far. But
One Shringaras.
yeah, I know who doesn't.
Yeah,
Who doesn't?
So tell me on the flip side, how do you handle, challenging emotions like Rodra or Vibhatsa? Yeah.
I feel that Bibats and Rodaras, even though they are negative, but these couples have handled it so well. So Gautam Rishi did get angry at his wife and Indra, but it was very well directed in the sense that his wife, as per Valmiki Ramayana, so different Ramayans and different Puranas state this story differently. In Valmiki Ramayana, it's very cleverly given how being a Rishi Patni, who herself had a lot of intelligence and spiritual powers, she did not play into the disguise of Indra. She could recognize him. She recognized him the moment he came disguised as a husband. And she knew that her husband would never ask for this sexual favor right in the morning, which was a time dedicated for prayers. So, but it was a weak moment which she gave into. And that angered Rishi, and he cursed her, he cursed Indra, but he cursed her very intelligently. So he did not turn her into stone, as we all talk about, and as per Valmiki Ramayana, but he told her to go in, to introspect, to go and meditate and realize what was the right path, and to connect with God. And when she did that, Ram had to come. So Bhagwan had to come to connect with her back again. And then she was revived again. So, but of course, even after the curse, he realized, and Indra, he directed it because Indra had come with an aim to destroy his powers, his spiritual powers, which he managed to do. So because Indra is always scared of losing his post to someone who's more spiritually enhanced, and he could feel that fear from Gautam Rishi. So it was his conduct wasn't right, and Rishi cursed him accordingly. So basically, it was well directed. After that, he left for the mountains to carry on his penance so that he could regain what he had lost, and also to, he realized that anger, he knew that anger was not the best of emotions. So he went back to carry on his penance. Yeah.
So, what life lessons can readers really draw from the sacrifices made by Lakshman and Urmila, as explored in your book?
So I feel that Lakshman and Urmila are very good examples of, what our scriptures tell us to do. Like, say, Gita Ji. Bhagwan talks about one-pointedness, towards your guru, towards Bhagwan, to any one entity that you consider bigger than you. And then to surrender completely. And that's what he tells Arjun, you keep doing whatever works placed in front of you, but don't be the doer. And that's exactly what Lakshman and Urmila did. They just kept their brother and Bhabi at a pedestal and just followed, whatever was best for them. So here what happens is that there's no ego attached to anything that you do. And it's all nothing is yours, The ownership is not there. So it kind of, it's a life of servitude.
So let's just talk a little about Krishna and the gopis, which are very central to Hasya Ras, right? Laughter. We all love to laugh. So why is humor so vital, in divine and human relationships? I think it's one of the most, it's one of the gifts that you have with some friendships. And I think laughter really helps you ease through so many life problems. But let's get your take on this.
You're so correct. So usually what happens is that you'll always see gopis and Krishna mentioned as Shringar Ras, which is not wrong either. But the reason I took Hasya Ras, because I noticed when I was reading Bhagavatam Puran, I realized that Bhagwan was not just being funny with them or not just, like cracking jokes or pulling pranks. He was doing it, but underlying, he was trying to teach them life lessons. And that I think was fabulous. So what I felt was, when we try to teach someone life lessons, we are always, it'll either be sternness, like we'll be angry, or we'll be stern, or, it's in a way which is not very comfortable. So many times you'll find, people receiving that, especially children, not accepting it. Because then, it's such an uncomfortable situation. It's bringing down the ego, the person in front of you. But I felt this was such a beautiful way, haste, in laughter, playing with them. He was teaching them life lessons. For example, this popular story of Krishna taking away their clothes when they were having a bath in the river. So as per our scriptures, it's considered a kind of a path to have a bath in the rivers naked. You had to. It's like a disrespect to the river. And that's what they were doing. They had completely removed their clothes and they were having a bath in the river. And Bhagwan wanted to teach them the lesson that this is not right. So he quietly stole their clothes and like this, many other instances like this.
So you've also written a very popular book called The Seven Immortals, immortality, boon or a curse, which I'm also constantly thinking about. Can you give us a brief introduction to the Seven Immortals and their significance in Indian mythology?
One name that comes to my head right in the beginning is Mahabali, because that's how I've kind of dated them according to time. So all these seven immortals, I'd like to say, were much larger than life characters. Their achievements were, beyond what we can imagine. And they were very hardworking as well as very accomplished in their fields. So, and there was one way or the other that they had very strong life goals to become immortals. Out of 7, 6 were blessed to be immortal, but one, Ashwathama, he was actually cursed to live on. So Mahabali is the king of Daityas. He was Prahlad's grandson, Bhakt Prahlad's grandson, and he had a very close connection with Vishnu Bhagwan. But in the Vaman form, Vishnu Bhagwan takes away all all his land or all the entire universe that he owned, and then sent him down to Suthala to live there. And he readily accepted it. He knew that Bhagwan had come and he's going to do this. His guru tried to warn him, but commitment was very important for him. So I feel each one like this. Then Hanumanji is in total servitude, total bhakti to Bhagwan Ram. And he'd rather be on the earth to hear the Bhagwan ki katha rather than, live with him. For him, the katha has more nectar. So I feel each one, I can just keep going on because there's 7 of them. Kripacharya is another one. He was the Kul Guru of the Kurus, of Kauravas. And there's Ved Vyasji, who's written all the Puranas. He's the one who splits the Vedas, and the Vedas that we find today are because of him. He's the one who wrote Mahabharata, so very highly accomplished. And there's Parshuramji, who's waiting for the Kalki avatar to train him, because not only is he an avatar of Vishnu, but he's also a very accomplished guru. He taught Dronacharya ji, he taught Bhishma Pitame, so he's taught various stalwarts. And now he's waiting for the Kalki avatar, and he's crossed his paths with Ram avatar of Vishnu Bhagwan, Krishna avatar. So, it's very interesting. I think each character is interesting in their own way. So I feel that, even this question, immortality, curse or boon, if you have a goal of this magnitude, then I think being immortal is fine.
Absolutely. I think so too. But now let's just talk a little bit about, the lives of the immortals that can serve as a metaphor really, for contemporary world, right? So there are human struggles, that is ambition, which isn't easy. Many times ambition leads to a lot of darkness, loyalty that we are constantly every day grappling with, in our everyday lives. And of course, perseverance. I for sure think that as writers, I'm a writer and author myself, that we need to, keep on writing and persevere. There are days that you don't know what to write. So just share with me the metaphors, that we can think about and take from your book for our everyday life.
I feel each character brings forward their own qualities. And I think the biggest lesson that I would draw is from Ashwathama. Because, he was born with the blessing of Shivji. He had this big money on his forehead, which did not let him feel any of the pains and hunger of the mortal world. He was protected by it. But then the choices that he made in life. So there is always this free will and the choice, because there's always this discussion whether we have the free will or not. And I think the path he chose was wrong, which landed him with a curse from Krishna Bhagwan, because he tried to kill an infant in the womb of Uttara. So I feel that it is the choices in life that you make that actually, basically characterize you or kind of decide how you're going to be. Perseverance you mentioned. So I feel most of the characters have a lot of perseverance because, again, they're stalwarts, they're hardworking, they are larger than life. They've excelled in whatever they did. And so I feel that each character from our scriptures, let alone these 7 immortals, teach us a lot of, I feel, how to live life, I would say.
So, all the immortals are male characters, right? So don't you think that this reflects the patriarchal influence also in our mythology? I mean, the curse is always on the woman and not on the man. And this, I think, in today's world, people are questioning. the whole sense of equality. So what's your take on that?
So curse, I won't agree with you, because you see, Ahilya was cursed, but Indra was also cursed. So curses have happened to whoever has not lived the way they should have. But definitely, only male characters being immortals. I agree with you there. There could be some level of patriarchal influence there, because there are trees, there are animals, there are birds who are also immortal. So the list goes on. In fact, I want to do sequel on them, because there's Kakbushundi from Ramcharitmanas. He's a crow, and he's an immortal crow. And there are trees also which are immortal. So, but female characters have not been shown as immortal. So definitely either there's some deep meaning which I've not been able to discover, or it's the patriarchal influence.
Definitely the patriarchal influence for sure. So just tell me a little bit about, this mythology and modern life. How do you think that these stories become timeless?
So again, there are so many life lessons to be learned from these stories, even though these stories might seem like outdated and, in past, but there is so much symbolism in each story.
For sure.
It's your truth for you to find, basically, what resonates with you.
Yeah.
Because, Geeta ji has been, commented on by so many people, and different people have given different commentaries, and everything is acceptable. So it's really for you to find your truth, I feel.
So Shalini, tell me, who are your favorite authors and how have they influenced your writing style and approach to storytelling?
So I've read many authors, but I don't think anyone's really influenced my writing. What has influenced my writing is the need for the coming generation, as well as for the already, people who are not so interested in the scriptures, to bring out their interest, so that they pick up a book and they finally, which I see many people saying now, because not only am I writing, but there are a lot of authors who are writing in this genre. And I feel that has stirred a kind of interest for people to pick up the original Ramayana or Mahabharata and wanting to read that what is it. So I think it stemmed from there. But of course, there are so many authors there who are doing a fabulous job.
What advice would you give to aspiring authors, especially those who are interested in mythology or philosophical themes in their writing?
I feel, the only advice that I feel, that if you're not writing fiction and you're writing non-fiction, then please do your research well. Don't be shoddy with your research, and don't just Google and write what is there on Google, because sometimes it doesn't, it's not the correct form of it. So because we as authors of non-fiction books have a lot of responsibility to give the correct knowledge to the readers, so that generations down don't take forward wrong stories, wrong beliefs. I just feel that that's a responsibility that we have.
What are the habits that you have, as a writer? What time do you write in the mornings? And what are those techniques that have really worked well for you? Because it isn't easy to do mythology. And, to go back into it requires tremendous amount of research.
So I think one thing is one habit, because I feel, with our daily lives and social commitments and house commitments, and as various roles that we play as women, and especially because writing I'm doing at home, it's not like I'm going to an office. So it's always considered like not like work, because...
Yeah. Tell me about it.
So the challenge I find is to write. What I fixed for myself is that I must write every day. It could be certain days I write much more than the others, but I have to write every day. And the other thing is research, which, like you said, I have to research, and I land up with a roadblock when the same story is given differently in different places, or sometimes, so then I have to figure out, I realize that I have to write what resonates with me out of the lot. Also, I feel that sometimes the same story is given in parts in different Puranas. Like some part will be here and some part will be there. So that's a constant struggle sometimes I find. I often think that, I think fiction writing might be better, but I'm sure they face their own challenges.
No,
Hmm.
of course, I'm so sure. Writing isn't really easy. It's so much of investment of yourself, your emotion, bearing your heart, and waiting for the world to judge you. But well, once a writer, you're born a writer, you write forever. So, lastly, can the readers expect a sequel to Rasas in Divine Relationships, or perhaps maybe a new book exploring similar themes, as you just mentioned? Tell us a little bit more.
So I'm surprised that you asked me this question because I've just signed a contract with Rupa for the sequel. And the whole idea came from one of the questions that I received on the launch of the book. Because there are these set of rasas which are connected to the bhaktas and the Bhagwan. And these are how a bhakt treats Bhagwan. So, it could be you treat Bhagwan as your child. So, Vatsalya ras. You treat Bhagwan as your lover. So, Shringar ras. You become Bhagwan ka das, like Hanumanji. So, it becomes Dasya ras. So, it's basically how a bhakt perceives Bhagwan to be. You could treat him like a child, like Laddu Gopal, taking care of it. Now, winters are here in Delhi, it's like very cold. We dress up Bhagwan with all the, when we put them to sleep, also we're putting the razai over them, we're giving them food to eat. So it's almost like they are your baby. So different rasas, different ways of perceiving Bhagwan. That's the sequel.
Congratulations, Shalini, and we wish you all the best. Thank you for taking all the time to be on our episode today with us, and lots and lots of books, many, many more books, and loads of success to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.